Halfway through Wind Waker, something really weird happens. The game sends us back home to the starting island. We have to return back to the place where the game actually began. See, Wind Waker is a bit unusual in one regard. In Wind Waker, Link actually has a family. He has a sister and, much more importantly, he also has a grandmother, and this grandmother is at the center of the weird thing that is about to happen. So there's a curse going on that prevents the night from ever ending, and that we have to end to proceed with the game's story. We can end this curse in a cave at the back of the island where the game began, but the game does not allow us to enter this cave yet. First, the game gives us a different task. We have to pay our grandmother a visit. We can't board the ship until we talked with her, so we go talk to our poor granny. Here is what she has to say. Oh, Link, Ariel, don't go, don't leave, don't leave your poor old grandmother all alone, She's heartbroken because we left her behind. And then we turn around, board our ship, and leave our heartbroken grandmother behind once again. This weird sequence is incredibly interesting. The game refuses to go on if we do not meet our heartbroken grandmother. Wind Waker, a game with graphics this colorful and animations this goofy, forces us to break our granny's heart. Why would the game do that? What is the point? And I think I know the answer to this question, or at least I have a theory. A theory deeply rooted within Wind Waker's themes. See, beyond its colorful and childlike aesthetics, Wind Waker is actually a surprisingly mature game. In this video, we'll set sail once again. We will travel through Wind Waker's many islands and into its colorful dungeons. We will discuss lots of interesting aspects of the game along the way, and in the end, we will hopefully discover what the major themes are that are operating the world in the background. Basically, we're about to set out on a journey to figure out why we have to see our grandmother suffer in The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. That's one side of this video. But there is another one as well, because Wind Waker is not only a colorful adventure that deals with surprisingly mature themes, it is also one of Nintendo's biggest failures. Wind Waker is a game that was quite ahead of its time when it released. As a matter of fact, I'd argue Wind Waker was so far ahead of its time that it ended up being a catastrophe for Nintendo. The game not only ended up being a financial disappointment, it also changed the public's perception of Nintendo's brand. Up to this day, Wind Waker marks a turning point in the history of Nintendo, and it wasn't a turn for the better. To understand why Wind Waker was such a catastrophe for Nintendo, we have to understand not only the economic realities into which it was released, but we also have to have a chat about the maturing of the video gaming industry as a whole. That's the second side of this video. We will set out to dig up the tragic origin story of Wind Waker, one of Nintendo's best games and one of Nintendo's worst games. Before we set sail, just one more thing. Due to the nature of this video, this thing is going to spoil the entirety of Wind Waker, start to finish, including the final boss fight. Don't worry, that is not the final boss fight in the background yet, that's just the Teletubbies episode. Hooray! We got quite a journey ahead of us, so let's get this thing going. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a place that hopes to give interesting perspective on great games. This is Wind Waker. It's the 24th of August. The year is 2000. We are in Japan. It's a big day for Nintendo. The yearly Space World trade show is about to take place. The Space World was an annual trade show hosted by Nintendo where they often revealed what they've been working on. And they've been working on a lot. The GameCube and the Game Boy Advance are to be revealed at this show. To convey the insane power of the GameCube, Nintendo had prepared a bunch of short clips. One of them especially drew the attention of the audiences and of the press. A short clip of Link fighting Ganondorf. The graphics in this clip were absolute state of the art. Nobody had ever seen Link before in such high resolution and with such realistic graphics. People were hyped. They couldn't wait to learn more about the next-gen Zelda game that Nintendo had been working on. Fast forward a year. It's the Space World 2001. Gamers and journalists from all over the world once again look forward to learn the news that Nintendo has to share. Alongside tons of other things, Nintendo has a teaser prepared. a teaser for their upcoming Zelda game. On this fateful day, it should be revealed to the world what the sequel to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask was going to be. The curtain dropped and the clip started to play. This is what they revealed. It looked nothing like the teaser from a year earlier. As a matter of fact, it looked like a cartoon. The teaser showed a childlike Link stabbing moblins into the bottom. It had Link comically sneak around. It showed Link playing cartoonish tricks on his enemies. But most importantly, it looked nothing like the demo from a year earlier. So how did the audiences react? Well, let's take a look. There's actually an old IGN message board thread still online in which we can read up the thoughts of people back then. Why did Nintendo do this? Last Space World, the game looked great. It was one of the most impressive things they showed. And now they go and make themselves look like morons. I hope this is just a joke. Please let it be. All I'm saying is if that GameCube Zelda happens to look like that when it's released, Miyamoto better realize what he did wrong when he sees that he makes very little profit in the States because so many people object the new art style. I mean, dang, looks like a Barney adventure game. I hope this game bombs bad. Not because I hate Nintendo, but because it will make them make a good Zelda. I can honestly say the only reason I bought my N64 was for Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and I thought after looking at the list of upcoming games, it would be the same scenario for the GameCube. But now I'm not too sure if it's worth buying the GameCube when it comes out, cause the launch titles pretty well lick a $. And those are some of the nicer comments. People hated it. It's kind of funny looking back at it from a distance today, but back in 2001, people were legitimately upset because of the new art style. The Nintendo magazines were flooded with mails and letters complaining about the art style. Early message boards were full with complaints about it. A petition to change the art style was sent to Nintendo. It read, "We the fans of Zelda plead to you to realize that not all Zelda fans are kids, nor do we all enjoy your new animated anime designs. Seeing as you have shown both a mature and a cartoon graphical Zelda, we ask that both be made and released worldwide." This online petition gathered over 10,000 signatures. In 2001, Miyamoto was asked about it in pretty much every interview he gave that year, until he finally gave one of my favorite PR answers ever. Just play the game without thinking too much about the visuals. It will be a lot more fun. You can really hear his frustration shine through this answer. But most damaging, even though the game launched to glowing reviews, Wind Waker ended up selling way below Nintendo's expectations, especially in North America. Fast forward 2 decades. Wind Waker and the HD remake are both sitting at a 9.0 user rating out of 10 on Metacritic. Breath of the Wild is only sitting at 8.8 for comparison. Tears of the Kingdom is only sitting at 8.4. Today, decades after its release, Wind Waker is widely beloved. So what happened there in 2001? What went wrong? Why did people reject the game when it was originally released? And why is the game so beloved today when people hated it at release? Well, to figure this out, we have to take a look at the game itself. The game begins with Link asleep in the sunshine. His sister wakes him and tells him to wake up, since today is his birthday. The fact that the game begins on Link's birthday is something that will actually pop up later again and is surprisingly important. So let's stick a delayed gratification sticker onto this for now, so that we don't forget it and move on. We head to our grandmother, who gives us our birthday present. She literally can't believe that we are already old enough to wear those clothes. Those clothes are the hero's clothes. In the old days, this birthday was the day where boys were finally considered to be men. So Wind Waker literally takes place on the first day that Link is no longer considered to be a child. Wearing our new fashionable outfit, we return to our sister, and with this, the action kicks off. Suddenly, a gigantic bird flies through the sky, a girl in its claws. Pirates are chasing the bird, trying to save the girl. One of the cannonballs hits the creature, which causes the poor girl to fall into the woods. Oh and no. Luckily, we are here to help. We grab a sword, head into the woods, defeat a bunch of moblins and rescue the poor girl. This girl is Tetra, the leader of the pirates that we just saw. With Tetra saved, we leave the forest again, but all of a sudden, the bird appears again, and this time it kidnaps our sister. The pirates agree to help us save our sister, and together we set out to infiltrate the bird's hideout. They settle on a brilliant infiltration plan that, to everyone's surprise, ends up not entirely working as planned, and with this, the game gets going. At this point, we are only 40 minutes in and are already sneaking through a pirate fortress. In the original, The Legend of Zelda, Link is allowed to explore a vast world from the very beginning. Almost every area can be explored from the start. The items can be found in different orders, and even most of the dungeons can be entered early. In a certain way, the first NES Zelda is one of the first open world games ever created. The game was famously inspired by Miyamoto's childhood experiences exploring forests near his hometown. However, as the Zelda series evolved, something changed. The games became less and less open in structure. What began with a totally open world turned into a semi-open world with Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, and soon morphed into a completely linear experience in, for example, Skyward Sword. When it came to developing Breath of the Wild, Nintendo finally wanted to reverse this trend. They wanted to go back to the roots of the series. With Breath of the Wild, they famously wanted to return to the core of the Zelda series. Breath of the Wild is driven by exploration-driven gameplay. When it released, it was by far the most exploration-driven Zelda game ever made. Far more than even the original Zelda was on the NES. In a certain way, Breath of the Wild is Zelda in its purest form and at its core. The game launched with Nintendo talking a lot about how Breath of the Wild finally returned the Zelda series to the one thing it was always about: exploration. Hooray! There's just one problem with this. At least in my humble opinion, the Zelda series never was about exploration and discovery to begin with. Those things clearly are all present in all games, but at least for me, exploration never was the main appeal of the Zelda series. To me, the core of the Zelda series has always been to go on a grand adventure, to set out as a young boy to be confronted with an evil much greater than we are, to grow along the journey, to venture into dungeons, to grow in power and wisdom, to slay dragons, to explore horrific tombs, to solve puzzles, to grow up and in the end become so powerful that we succeed against all odds. The Zelda games just used to be those grand adventures. And this very thing, going onto a grand adventure, is in my opinion the very thing that makes Wind Waker so special. We are only 30 minutes into our playthrough, yet we are already sneaking through a pirate fortress. 30 minutes later, we explore a city. Next we sail the sea on the King of Red Lions, a talking boat and our companion in this game. A bunch of minutes later, we are bombing our way into an island. Next we climb the inside of a volcano. A second later, we run over a collapsing staircase. Then we fight a gigantic scorpion to save a dragon, sail the sea some more, befriend a Deku tree, learn to fly with a Deku leaf, explore a massive overgrown dungeon full of monsters, traps, puzzles, and defeat a colorful boss. And that's just a bunch of hours of gameplay. In my opinion, Wind Waker just nails the feeling of going onto a grand adventure. It throws so many different ideas at us in such a short time frame that it just stays wonderfully engaging throughout its runtime. It's just this wonderful coming-of-age adventure. To me, this has always been the core appeal of the Zelda series, and Wind Waker nails this aspect. It's something about the game that I thoroughly enjoy. At the top of the Forsaken Fortress, we encounter Ganondorf for the very first time, who promptly throws us back into the ocean. We awaken next to the King of Red Lions, the talking boat that acts as our companion. Turns out we have to find 3 magical pearls if we ever want to stand a chance against Ganondorf. And thus we set sail towards Dragon Roost, the island that features the first dungeon in the game. Let's talk about the dungeons in Wind Waker for a second. Wind Waker's dungeons are probably best described with 2 words: linear and easy. All the dungeons in the game follow a very linear structure. The path ahead is usually really straightforward. At the same time, the puzzles and combat challenges in the dungeons are easy as well. There isn't much in the game that will force us to really concentrate to beat it. Overall, the game's dungeons just linearly guide us from one easy challenge to the next one. So here's a thing that might surprise you to hear. but I enjoy the dungeon design in Wind Waker a lot. I don't think those dungeons are the very best dungeons Nintendo ever crafted or anything, but I do think they suit the game perfectly, and that they are a ton of fun. Here's the thing. Complex versus linear isn't good versus bad, and easy versus difficult is also not good versus bad. Those things are just different tools for different jobs. Sometimes it's better to go with more complex dungeons, sometimes it's better to go with linear design. Sometimes making a game easier serves the game, sometimes making a challenge difficult is necessary to achieve what the designers set out to achieve. It's just something I often see when reading discussions about game design. Sometimes people default to complexity and difficulty being good by default, and simplicity and a lack of challenge being bad by default. But at least in my humble opinion, that's just not how things work. The question isn't if it's good that something is simple, the question is why something is simple or easy. And I think for Wind Waker, there is a clear answer to this question. The dungeons aren't meant to be challenging puzzle boxes, but they are meant to be fast-moving adventure boxes. Adventure boxes that confront us with interesting and varying challenges at a rapid pace without providing much friction in between. And if this is what they were going for, then they certainly succeeded. Just take the second dungeon for example. Here we traverse water on top of a gigantic flower, we fight dangerous flying insects, we solve small puzzles by using the power of the wind, we make it through rooms where ranks are shooting out of the ground, we platform on top of moving platforms, cut down vines, glide through rooms using flowers that spit us into the air and operate wobbly platforms. The dungeons confront us with different ideas in a rapid succession. Since the dungeons don't provide much friction in terms of complexity or difficulty, everything moves so fast, which, at least in my opinion, makes the dungeons really enjoyable. It ties into the idea of Wind Waker being a grand adventure. Hooray! After defeating the boss of this dungeon, it is time for us to travel to the next island. But before we chat about this island, we first have to chat about something differently. We have to have a chat about probabilities. I usually try to avoid calling things in games good or bad game design. See, when creating games, there isn't such a thing as good and bad when it comes to design. As I see it, there are intentions and there are tools. Take tedium, for example. Making something deliberately tedious sounds like bad game design on the surface. But is it though? There are scenarios where it makes sense to make something tedious by design. Maybe we want to discourage players from doing something, but do not want to disable it entirely, for example. Maybe we want players to feel tedium for a bit before gaining a new power, so that they then can feel how impactful the upgrade was. Maybe there's a lore or story reason for something to be tedious, and that is more important than creating the most enjoyable moment-to-moment gameplay. Or maybe it is necessary to hide certain rewards in, say, online games behind tasks so tedious that only the most dedicated players are willing to do them, because otherwise the reward would not feel valuable. You know, things that may appear to be bad game design on the surface may actually be good game design, and the other way around. So instead of asking if something is good or bad, I think it just makes a lot more sense to ask why something is the way it is. Okay, so why do I bring this up in a video about Wind Waker, one might ask? Well, because Wind Waker features a design decision that I unironically and straight up would call bad game design, something I usually try to avoid. A real stumble, something I think all game designers should always try to avoid. To understand the problem, we have to talk about the fast sail. Sailing the ocean in the original version of Wind Waker was a bit tedious, because the sailing speed was quite low and we had to change the direction of the wind whenever we wanted to change direction. Because of this, they added a faster sail in the HD version of the game that magically always sails with the wind. And it's a good addition. It really makes exploring the ocean much more enjoyable. The problem isn't the sail, it is how we obtain it. So there is an auction event every night on Windfall Island. The auction itself is a fun little minigame where we have to bet the right amount of rupees at the right times to end up winning the item we want, but we also have to be careful not to make the item too expensive during bidding. It's fun. Here's the problem. The sail is one out of 5 items that can potentially appear. The auction may feature a joy pendant, one of 2 different treasure charts, a heart piece, or the sail that we are looking for. If the sail does not show up, we have to leave the auction, play the song that makes time pass fast twice in a row, re-enter the auction, sign up for the auction, watch an auction intro sequence, and then we find out if the sail is up for auction tonight or not. 4 out of 5 times the item we were looking for won't be up for auction. Resetting the auction house, however, takes about a minute and a half. What this means is that we basically got one 20% shot every 90 seconds to spawn the sale. See, for the sake of arguments, let's assume that Wind Waker HD Remake got played about 10 million times globally. The sale appearing with a chance of 20% means 4 out of 5 people that walk into the auction once will walk out of it without the sale. 2/3 will fail to spawn the sale twice. About 1/3 of players will have to enter the auction 5 times to spawn the sale. About 10% of players will have to reset the auction 10 times. 1 in 100 players will have to re-enter the auction 20 times to spawn the sale. If the game is played a million times, that means that statistically 100,000 people had to spend over half an hour resetting the auction house just to spawn the sale. 1 in 1,000 players has to reset it 30 times. Statistically, about 100 players had to reset this thing 50 times, which takes far over an hour of just mashing through dialogue. That's not optimal, is it? If players end up having bad luck spawning the sale, this becomes incredibly frustrating. And I can assure you that this becomes frustrating because this exact thing happened to me during this playthrough. I had to reset the auction house over a dozen times. Since I also had to look up what was going on and how to actually reset the auction house, I spent over 40 minutes here. It took me longer to obtain the sale than it took me to complete the first dungeon. So this leaves us with a question. Why did they design it this way? And I honestly believe because they simply oversaw the problem. I think they just missed that there is a problem with this, which is as close to objectively bad game design as it possibly gets. When using probabilities like this in a game, there really has to be some form of bad luck protection in place. Otherwise, the sheer amount of players just means that some players sooner or later will have an incredibly frustrating experience. Other than that, the sale is really cool though. Hooray! With the fast sale finally installed, it is time for us to hunt down the third and final MacGuffin. We walk back to our boat, ready to set out and get stopped by this lovely chat. A worried father, missing his kidnapped daughter, approaches us and starts to talk with us. He begs us to bring her back to him. There is nothing we can do to avoid this dialogue. The guy is incredibly annoying, and after being assaulted by him the first couple of times, most players probably actively run away from the heartbroken father. That's not me complaining, by the way. I love the guy. So back into the boat with us. The next stop is the third dungeon. When we arrive at the island where the third dungeon should be, we make a horrible discovery. The entire island is destroyed. We are too late. Ganon demolished the entire island. This is a really unexpected moment in the game. So unexpected, as a matter of fact, that we have to chat about it in detail. Let's find out why Ganon destroyed the island before we reached it. To answer this little riddle, we have to travel back in time. Once again, we have to travel back to the beginning of the millennia. And we have to talk about the PlayStation. The year is 2001. Nintendo just revealed Wind Waker in the now infamous Space World trailer. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is running in the cinemas next to the Fellowship of the Ring. The World Trade Center attacks happened. The GameCube released in North America. Alicia Keys is swiping the Grammys with her song Fallen, and Sony, well, Sony had released the PlayStation 2 a year earlier, and while this gave them a head start over Nintendo, it also meant that the console launched with an unimpressive launch lineup. The most critically acclaimed launch title was SSX, a snowboarding racing game, followed by Dead or Alive 2, a port of a Dreamcast game, and Madden NFL. None of those games were bad games by any means, but none of them were system sellers. Sony decided to move fast to catch Nintendo off guard with the release of the PS2. The same strategy they already used with the original PlayStation. But the PS2 did not quite have the lineup at launch to really get everyone jump onto the ship before the GameCube was even released. This, however, was about to drastically change in 2001. 2001's PS2 lineup is among the most impressive lineups any console generation ever had. In 2001, the following games made their way onto the PlayStation 2. Rayman 2: The Great Escape, NCAA Football, Jak and Daxter, Ico, Twisted Metal, Black Clonoa 2, Final Fantasy X, SSX Tricky, NHL and NFL 2002, Devil May Cry, Gran Turismo 3, Metal Gear Solid 2, GTA 3 and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. And those are just the releases in the year that ended up with a Metacritic of 90 or higher. Half-Life, Baldur's Gate, Escape from Monkey Island and Silent Hill 2 hit the console that year as well. The PS2 had 15 games with a Metacritic score of 90 or higher in 2001. Just for comparison, 2023 is widely regarded as one of the better years for gaming in recent memory. The PS5 had only 9 games with a Metacritic score of over 90 in 2023, and this list includes niche games like Cocoon, Tetris Effect Connected or Moss Book 2, a VR game. In 2001 alone, the PlayStation 2 had a lineup worthy of an entire console generation. And even better, most of those games were exclusive to the PlayStation 2 at that time. It was only at the end of this record year that Nintendo released their own entry into the console war, the GameCube. And the GameCube launched with Crazy Taxi and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, but without the online mode. The only notable exclusive was Luigi's Mansion, which critics at the time really did not get behind. It launched to a Metacritic score of 78, which is almost comically low, but happened nonetheless. The only glimmer of hope for the GameCube was the release of Smash Bros. Melee in December, but at this point the ship had pretty much already left the harbor. Nintendo needed a spectacular second year to at least somewhat catch up to the insane library the PS2 built in 2001. They needed to shoot out of all the pipes. They needed to send their 2 hardest hitters into the ring. More than ever, Nintendo needed Mario and Link. And in 2002, both hit the console. Super Mario Sunshine and Wind Waker both released in 2002. And both games show massive signs of being rushed. Super Mario Sunshine basically has no final level, few levels to begin with, last minute shines like the ones connected to my beloved blue coins, and a lot of areas that just lack a tiny bit of polish. And Wind Waker, well, Wind Waker shows tons of signs of being rushed too. The game only features 5 dungeons, way fewer than for example Ocarina of Time. The final section of Wind Waker is just a boss rush with copied and pasted bosses. Literally, the bosses even deal the exact same amount of damage they dealt at the beginning of the game. They didn't even have time to scale up the damage numbers. It's even worse actually. They even take away all our items that we got after we originally defeated the boss, just because they had no time to test the bosses with the new items. Lots of islands feel empty or underdeveloped. Lots of side content had to go. Lots of parts in the main quest feel rushed. And at least 2 dungeons were cut. One of those dungeons was replaced with the Triforce Hunt in the second half of the game. The other one, however, well, that one was planned to take place on the destroyed island that we are currently standing in front of. What happened to Wind Waker and Mario Sunshine is one of the greatest Nintendo-related tragedies that have ever happened. Because both games, Wind Waker and Mario Sunshine, are masterpieces in my opinion, even in the rushed state in which we got the games. I can only imagine how incredible both games would have turned out if the devs got another year to work on them. But I do understand why Nintendo had to rush those games out. They had no choice. They already lost the N64 generation to the PlayStation. You know, you can lose one console generation and come back from it, but coming back from 2 lost console generations in a row is much more difficult, as Microsoft is currently finding out the hard way. Nintendo had to do everything in their power to somewhat catch up to Sony. They had to rush out Wind Waker, but it was already too late. Nintendo wasn't able to catch up to it anymore. The GameCube ended up selling a bit over 20 million consoles. The PS2 sold about 160 million. So now we know why Ganon destroyed this island. He was worried about the insane lineup of the PS2 in 2001 and wanted to help the devs to get the game out faster. But where do we find our MacGuffin now that the island is in shambles? Well, back home on Outset Island, the place where the game began. It is during this storm that the game forces us to return home to our granny. And as we already found out before, Granny ain't doing well. More on that in a second. After breaking our granny's heart the second time, we finally find the third pearl. We place those 3 pearls on 3 different Pikmin-inspired statues, which causes a gigantic tower to rise from the ocean floor. This tower features the third dungeon, one of my favorites in the game. It is built around 2 different gimmicks. The lowest floor is flooded, and we have to move around in our boat while making use of the periodically rising and sinking tides. The upper floor is built around an escalating gimmick, using those statues. We have to get several of those statues into a central room. At first we carry them, then we have them follow us before learning a new song and taking control over them entirely. It's really cool. Towards the end of the dungeon, they once again pull the same trick they already pulled in the first dungeon and have us step out into daylight. I really like those moments where we leave the inside of the dungeon and explore the outside for a bit. A lot of thought went into integrating the dungeons into their environment so that they feel like a natural part of the island instead of just an artificial dungeon box. And I think it really helps make the dungeons feel like real places. The boss in this dungeon is a floating head with floating hands. I have no idea why Nintendo is so obsessed with this boss fight trope, but they have been using it for like ever. We fight such a boss in Mario 64 and in Ocarina of Time, we fight it here, we fight it in later Zeldas, heck, we even fight it in Odyssey, and you know, someone has to break it to Nintendo, so it might as well be me. Nintendo, you have to be strong now, but the hand with a head boss fight trope is a bit mediocre. It's fine, but it's not interesting enough to repeat it that often. I hope I didn't break anyone's heart saying that. After the boss fight, we ring a gigantic bell, which causes a mysterious light to appear on the sea floor below. If we enter this light, we slowly transcend to the bottom of the sea floor. We slowly transcend to one of the absolute highlights of the game. We transcend to the location of the Master Sword. Long ago, there existed a peaceful kingdom full of mountains and valleys, but one day, evil befell this otherwise peaceful land. Darkness spread and all hope seemed to die, until one day, a young hero dressed in green clothes appeared from nowhere. Wielding the Master Sword, he banished the evil and brought peace back to the land. This boy traveled through time to save the land, and thus was known as the Hero of Time. And this Hero of Time, of course, is a character we already met. It is the Link from Ocarina of Time. Wind Waker is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. See, one day, long after the hero had successfully banished Ganon, an evil fell wind befell the kingdom. The great evil that we banished in Ocarina of Time managed to escape its prison to once again befall the land. But this time, no hero appeared to save the people of Hyrule. Those times must have been desperate. All that the people had left was to pray, and the goddess answered their prayers. A few chosen ones were told to flee on top of the highest mountaintops of Hyrule. And then the goddess unleashed her power in a desperate attempt to stop Ganon. The entire area of Hyrule was flooded in an instant. Only the highest mountaintops were high enough to form islands on the vast new ocean that Hyrule had become. Only Hyrule Castle was spared. When the flood came, Ganon's minions had already infiltrated the castle. The goddess protected the castle by enclosing the space in a magical bubble that prevented water from flowing in and stopped the time in this area, presumably to prevent Ganon's forces from claiming the Master Sword that was hidden within the castle. A long time has passed since those events. The people that fled on top of the mountaintops started to build a new civilization. As time passed, what truly had happened soon became nothing more than a legend. Until one day, the bell atop the tower was rang by a young hero. Ringing this bell opens up a path towards the frozen castle of Hyrule at the bottom of the ocean. And this is exactly the place we are currently heading to. Reaching Hyrule Castle at the bottom of the ocean and claiming the Master Sword is an incredible moment in the game. And it is an incredible moment for more than one reason. At the beginning of the game, when we sneak through the Forsaken Fortress, we don't have a sword. Because of this, we can't fight the moblins that inhabit the fortress yet. All that we can do is put on a barrel and carefully sneak around, hoping that they do not spot us. If we make a mistake and get noticed, we're immediately captured and imprisoned. The first time we encounter moblins, we're so weak that we can't even fight them yet. In the second dungeon, right before we get the grappling hook, we become entrapped in a small arena. We fight a bunch of bokoblins at first before a bird appears and drops a new enemy into the ring. And this enemy is a moblin, the very enemy we had to avoid hours earlier. The enemy that forced us to sneak around hours earlier is now an enemy that we can tackle heads on. This fight is a cool little moment of growth for Link and us. We no longer have to hide from moblins, we're strong enough to beat them now. In the tower dungeon, there is a mini-boss guarding the bow. Once we enter the room, we're suddenly assaulted by a dangerous enemy that we haven't seen before. This mini-boss is a Dark Nut, a terrifying knight. Overcoming this intimidating knight is another small moment of growth that is rewarded with the bow. We arrive at Hyrule Castle at the bottom of the ocean. Everything is calm, but something is off. There is no color to be found anywhere. Everything is pale and grey. Dozens of enemies are in the castle. But would you look at that? It's enemies we encountered before. It's the mini-bosses. The castle is overrun with dozens of moblins and dark nuts. At this point in the game, those enemies are still really intimidating, and seeing all of them here, frozen in time, really conveys the oppressing power of Ganon. We solve a small puzzle in the center of the castle to reveal the path to the Master Sword. We pull out the sword, and suddenly something changes. Suddenly the color returns to the world. But it's not just color that reappears. The flow of time is restored as well. Suddenly all the mini-bosses in the room above come to life and the exit becomes locked. The only way to leave this room again is to slay all the monsters. And so we go back into the room, pull out our newly gained Master Sword, and completely tear all the enemies that were mini-bosses before to shreds. The Master Sword is a noticeable upgrade in power over the normal sword in Wind Waker, and we get to experience this insane power spike immediately by shredding through hordes of enemies that were used as bosses before. The sword makes us so powerful that mini-bosses are now degraded to being normal enemies. They set this moment up so wonderfully. We really get to feel how much power we suddenly wield because of the Master Sword. With the Master Sword, we can now return to the Forsaken Fortress to confront Ganon. The Forsaken Fortress is really interesting the second time through, because it feels a bit like an early blueprint for Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild. The whole area is completely non-linear the second time through, and because of the new items we got, mainly the leaf, we can now explore the place using lots of interesting routes and tricks. You know, gliding to different places with the leaf reminds me a lot of gliding to different places in Breath of the Wild. At the top, we rescue our sister, take revenge on the evil bird by causing it a severe headache, and afterwards, we finally confront Ganon. And then something interesting happens. Ganon completely obliterates us again. He is still much more powerful. The Master Sword had lost its power. But even worse, by pulling the sword out of the stone, we destroyed the final seal that was preventing Ganon from accessing his entire power. Tetra appears out of nowhere, and in one of gaming's most predictable plot twists, she is revealed to be Princess Zelda. We barely escape and return back to Hyrule on the ocean floor. And there we meet someone. King Dafne Snohansen, the King of Hyrule. But Dafne Snohansen isn't his only name. He's also known by the name the King of Red Lions. The King of Hyrule is revealed to be our boat. The whole time we've been sailing on the back of the King of Hyrule. Dafne now reveals Tetra her fate, the very reason why she lives. She is Princess Zelda, the last in Hyrule's bloodline. Together, we have to stop Ganon. We have to restore the power of the Master Sword by finding 2 sages and by discovering 8 parts of the Triforce. With this, the second half of the game kicks off. The second half is much less linear and much more focused on exploration. We're now free to sail wherever we want and to explore the vast ocean. Sadly, however, we won't join Link and the King of Red Lions on their exploration of the ocean for now, because we ourselves have some unfinished business as well. At the beginning of the video, we talked about the fact that Wind Waker was widely rejected by audiences when it released, but is deeply beloved today, decades later. Again, it has a higher user Metacritic score than Breath of the Wild, which leaves us with a question. Why? Why do people seem to enjoy the game so much more decades later? What has changed? So here's the thing, I have a theory about why audiences rejected Wind Waker when it came out. But to understand my little theory, we have to talk about something completely different first. We have to talk about why Donkey Kong is rapping in Donkey Kong 64. This here is Maniac Mansion. Maniac Mansion is a 1987 point-and-click adventure game made by none other than Lucasfilm Games. In Maniac Mansion, we play as a group of friends that infiltrates the mansion of the mad scientist Dr. Fred, who has kidnapped the protagonist's girlfriend. The game was highly critically acclaimed and actually pretty influential, but that is not why we're talking about it. See, in 1988, Lucasfilm Games wanted to port the game to the Nintendo Entertainment System, but they weren't able to, at least at first. But the reason why they weren't able to port the game wasn't because of technical reasons. The problem was Nintendo. Nintendo refused to release the game on the NES. Nintendo did not want their audiences to come in contact with the game Maniac Mansion. The game was too profane and featured too much nudity to be released on a family-friendly console, like the NES. So, what terrible, profane offenses was Maniac Mansion committing? What evil pornography was hiding below the game's cute surface? The shocking answer, the game's antagonist, Dr. Fred, had a line in which he talked about pretty brains being sucked out. Way too suggestive for the NES. But that was just the top of the iceberg, because there was nudity as well. The nudity. Namely, there was a swimsuit calendar, a classical sculpture, and a mummy in a playmate pose. Disgusting. Lucasfilm immediately understood what harmful game they had made and tried to correct their terrible mistake. They self-censored their game. They changed the line about a brain being sucked out to a brain being removed, and they simply got rid of the Michelangelo statue, the calendar, and the mummy. Only then Nintendo finally allowed them to release the game. The year is 2001. The LA Times just did a story about a Nintendo game that had just been released. Here's a quote from this LA Times article. "This is disgusting, sophomoric humor, and I'm disappointed in Nintendo," said Susan Jeffers, a mother of two and a part-time elementary school teacher in Cherville. "It's like Disney releasing pornography." Well, what had happened here? Well, what had happened was the release of a little game called Conker's Bad Fur Day. Conker's Bad Fur Day is a 2001 game developed and released by Rare, the company that had just developed Donkey Kong 64, and a company Nintendo had a significant amount of stakes in. Conker's Bad Fur Day is one of the most interesting video games ever made. The entire thing is so insane that we cannot possibly cover it in this video, but just to give you some ideas. The game begins with Conker, the squirrel, passing out drunk in the rain. One of the bosses is called Mighty Pooh, a gigantic opera singing, well, poop.
"I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you."
We defeat him by throwing toilet paper into his mouth. The game parodies the Saving Private Ryan Omaha Beach landing scene, and it looks like this. But this isn't the only thing it parodies. There is also Matrix parody in it, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Urinating is part of the gameplay, and we're really just scratching the surface here. It is utter insanity. It is also a genuinely good game. It's quite something. But what it certainly is, it is incredibly profane. So in 1988, Nintendo forced Lucasfilm to censor Maniac Mansion because this mummy was too profane for them. Only 13 years later, a company that Nintendo had a stake in released Conker's Bad Fur Day, one of the most profane games ever created. What had changed in those 13 years? Well, that's a really interesting question. See, when Nintendo launched the NES in North America, their marketing was very focused on kids. Nintendo advertised themselves as a family-friendly company that creates games for young children that are of high quality and that parents can trust to be a good fit for their kids. And Nintendo was incredibly successful with this strategy. The NES was a gigantic success. Tons of kids made their first gaming experiences with the NES. And when it was time to release the sequel to the NES, the Super Nintendo, in 1991, Nintendo once again focused their marketing on children. The campaigns were a bit more mature and targeted at a bit older kids, but the main target audience were still children. And here's where this gets really interesting. See, console gaming got completely wiped out in the great crash of '83. And then Nintendo came around and made home consoles popular once again by selling them to kids. During the NES and the SNES days, pretty much only children were playing console games. You know, it wasn't like today, where you have 26-year-old gamers and 46-year-old gamers, and even 6-year-old people playing video games on consoles. Back then, only children played video games. There were no people that had been playing console games for decades, because console games hadn't been mainstream for decades before. The entire demographic of gamers in the 80s and early 90s is kids. And this is why Nintendo was so worried about profanity in their games, because the main audience of the Nintendo Entertainment System were children. But those children do not stay children. They grow up, and by 2000, they are no children anymore. They are teenagers or young adults that played Nintendo games as kids. But now that they are no kids anymore, they want to play more, and big parentheses here, mature games that reflect how mature they are now. But at the same time, there are new kids entering the gaming space as well. So by the mid-90s, the gaming market split for the first time. Suddenly there are kids and adolescents that play games. And if there is one thing that adolescents do not like, then it is being mistaken for a child. And so Nintendo found themselves confronted with a tricky problem. On the one hand, they needed to give the now adolescent gamers the mature games that they were craving, so that they do not lose them to a competitor. But on the other hand, they also had to still make family-friendly games for kids. They had to come up with a solution on how to remain cool to the teenagers. And one thing they did was trying to include some things that teenagers in the 90s found cool into their games. And this is the reason why Donkey Kong is rapping in Donkey Kong 64. Hip-hop was the new and hot thing in the 90s. They had DK rap, so that DK stays cool to the teens. If it worked is a completely different story, but I very much suspect that this is the reason why everyone's second favorite Kong all of a sudden picked up a microphone. Another attempt to cater to the adolescent crowd was producing games directly aimed at them, and one of those mature games was Conker's Bad Fur Day. It was a desperate attempt by Nintendo to cater to a crowd of adolescents that were flirting with the PlayStation. You know, of course Nintendo isn't just for kids. Didn't you see the drunk squirrel urinate and Donkey Kong rapping? Or something like that must have been the thought process. Okay, so console gaming started with an audience of mainly children and then aged alongside those kids. So when those kids hit adolescence, gaming hits adolescents too. And once those kids finally grew up, gaming began to grow up as well. Looking at the history of console gaming through this lens explains a couple of things. It explains why the PlayStation was able to defeat Nintendo when it came to 3D gaming in the N64 era and later with the GameCube. Nintendo was the product that everyone played during their childhood, but as the kids grew older, they wanted something more mature, which the PlayStation cleverly advertised as. It explains why Nintendo made weird decisions in the late 90s, like Conker's Bad Fur Day or having DK rap. It also explains why there was such a sudden explosion of remasters and remakes, starting with the PS4 and Wii U. Those generations were the first ones having an audience that is old enough to be really nostalgic for games. You know, remasters aren't a trend that is going to fade away. It's a logical part of gaming that will probably stay with us forever. The reason it didn't pop up any sooner is because there just were no people around that were old enough to be nostalgic for games from the past. It also allows us to make a bunch of predictions about the future. There are, for example, very few gamers around that are in their 60s or 70s, simply because those kids from the 80s aren't in their 60s and 70s yet. But in 2 or 3 decades, they very likely will be, which means accessibility is probably going to become an even hotter topic. You know, as we age, our eyesight gets weaker, our reflexes become worse, our hearing worsens and whatnot. The same way, there are shows on television clearly catering towards 70-year-olds that everyone else cringes at. There will be games catering to those folks in 30 or 40 years once we all hit this age, and we'll probably all enthusiastically play them while the youth is cringing at us, as is the circle of life. So what has all of this to do with Wind Waker again? Well, with all of this firmly established, let's read a bunch more messages from the infamous IGN forum discussion about the reveal of Wind Waker, because I think they draw a very clear picture about what had happened. Now I think you all need to calm down and just wait a little bit and see what this game develops into. Nintendo for the past year has been telling us that it is not just for kids anymore. Do you honestly think they would just go and shoot themselves in the foot? Nintendo has been promising a more mature company, and I don't think they're going to let us down. I don't like it. I liked what Nintendo had done with Zelda on the N64. Light-hearted yet somewhat serious in tone. The wit of the new Zelda doesn't have a tone at all. It looked like it's gonna milk the cell shading look for all it's worth with cartoon humor. At the moment I'm not interested at all. But hey, Nintendo didn't make the game for a 15-plus-year-old gamer like me, right? Or take the first line of the petition that over 10,000 people signed. We, the fans of Zelda, plead you to realize that not all Zelda fans are kids, nor do we all enjoy your new animated anime designs. You know, those are just obviously teenagers. Teens that grew up with games and that were now afraid that gaming isn't going to grow up alongside of them. They had bought a GameCube and were now afraid that they bought the kids console, while their peers bought a mature PlayStation. Nowadays, nobody cares about that anymore, because nowadays there are games for kids, teens and adults on every platform. But back then, the kids didn't know that. They were afraid they bought the children's product. And this is the second huge tragedy of Wind Waker. Wind Waker, a game with extremely childish graphics, launched at the very peak of gaming's adolescence. If the game were released today, everyone would love it, but it just released at the worst time possible. There is so much irony to all of this, you know? Wind Waker was rushed out because the PS2 was doing so well with the teenagers already. Yet Wind Waker, if anything, made the GameCube less attractive to the audience Nintendo was losing. At the same time, the mature games that Nintendo created to cater to the teens, games like Conker's Bad Fur Day, are incredibly immature, while Wind Waker, in fact, deals with incredibly mature themes below its cel-shaded surface. And those mature themes are at the center of the third and final tragedy of Wind Waker. But one thing after the other. So how have Link and King Daphnes been doing while we were chatting about rapping apes and singing poop? They defeated the Wind God and learned to teleport around the oceans. They visited the Fairy Queen and obtained the Fire and Ice arrows. They used those arrows to make it into the frozen island and into the center of a volcano, and they found the iron boots and the power bracelets there and are now able to withstand strong wind and to pick up even the heaviest objects. And they made their way into the Earth Temple by teaching Medley a song of her ancestors that opens up the entrance. Wow, looks like those little guys have been quite productive while we were away. The Earth Temple is a pretty good dungeon in my opinion. There are just two things that annoy me about it. So first, why is the temple that is clearly modeled after a crypt and that we explore together with a bird called the Earth Temple? It just doesn't make any sense, especially since the Wind Temple has this brown aesthetics and requires us to plant seeds into the earth to beat it. Also, why is that one called Wind Temple? Objectively bad game design here, but that's just a nitpick. The other nitpick that I have with the Earth Temple is... Look, we previously talked about how cool it is that the first dungeons and the tower are integrated in their environment and make a lot of sense as real spaces. They clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this. The Earth Temple, however, does make absolutely no sense whatsoever. We enter the temple by jumping into a hole at about sea level. This is the island above. The dungeon just is clearly sunken below the ocean surface. Yet the entire gimmick of the dungeon is to let light shine in by opening windows or by destroying walls, which, you know, just no. If I blast away this wall, there shouldn't be light coming through. It should be water. We are underwater. Where is the light coming from? I very much doubt that they had planned the dungeon to be in this place. My best guess is that it once was either a tower or supposed to be a grave below Windfall or Outside Island. The rushed release probably caused this mess. After defeating the boss here, there is only one dungeon left, the catastrophically named Wind Dungeon. Other than the name might make you expect, the Wind Dungeon is actually pretty good. I really like the gimmick of having to use a second character to solve the puzzles, and having the little guy get kidnapped halfway through is surprising and a good change of pace. After defeating the boss here, the Master Sword finally returns to its former glory. All that is left to do for us now is to hunt down the 8 pieces of the Triforce. The Triforce hunt is either a nice change of pace or the worst part of the game, depending on which version of the game we're playing. On the GameCube version, we first have to find the treasure map for each Triforce piece, then we have to decipher it for hundreds of rupees on the Tingle Island, and afterwards we have to sail to the correct location to grab it there, which is really tedious to repeat 8 times in a row. The HD remake streamlined a lot of this, which makes the Triforce hunt quite enjoyable in my opinion. It makes a lot of sense to send the players all over the ocean towards the end of the game, now that they have all the items and can pick up collectibles that they have missed so far. Afterwards, we return back to Hyrule on the ocean floor. We shatter the barrier that prevented us from reaching Ganon's Tower. Ganon's Tower is a small mini dungeon in which we first fight all the bosses again, and afterwards face Phantom Ganon a second time. Once we made it to the very top of the thing, we finally encountered Ganondorf himself. But there is still one thing left for us to discuss. We have to answer the other question from the very beginning of the video. We still have no idea why the game forces us to break the heart of our poor grandmother. To finally understand this, we have to talk about one more thing. One thing very closely tied to Wind Waker's ending. You see, Wind Waker has one of my favorite endings in all of gaming. During the final boss fight, all the themes and the message of the game come together in such a beautiful way. It's incredible. But it is not just a wonderful ending sequence that we are about to witness. We are also about to witness the third and final tragedy of Wind Waker. We find Ganon atop the tower in a room filled with water that reflects everything above it. He's standing on the side of a bed. In this bed, Princess Zelda sleeps peacefully. The scene reminds us of a father standing next to the bed of his daughter. He is putting his hand over Zelda's sleeping head and looks into her dreams. Zelda is dreaming about oceans. Oceans and oceans. Zelda is dreaming about nothing but oceans. The way the game presents its narrative becomes very metaphorical towards the end. See, when Ganondorf says he sees that the sleeping Zelda is dreaming about oceans, he doesn't mean her dreams while sleeping. He means her dreams as her desires. Zelda wishes to set out on the oceans once again. She's a pirate after all, and perfectly accustomed to the flooded state of Hyrule. Zelda dreams of traveling the ocean once again. Next, Ganondorf tells us what he thinks about the ocean that Zelda desires. He hates it. He despises the ocean and the few people that are drifting on this endless sea like fallen leaves on a forgotten pool. In his views, the gods destroyed all of them. And then something really interesting and weird happens all of a sudden. Ganon transforms into a gigantic shadow that lingers over the sleeping Zelda in the bed, and the shadow that lingers over Zelda now transforms together with Zelda into a gigantic puppet that is controlled by strings, which is so weird. The game didn't have puppet enemies up to this point. It's no common Zelda trope for Ganon to transform into a puppet. A puppet isn't an especially terrifying or interesting motif for one of the final bosses. Why did they decide to go with a puppet here? Why doesn't Ganon transform into a dragon or a gigantic kraken or a head with 2 floating hands or a terrifying knight? Why did they go with a puppet on strings? To solve this little riddle, we finally have to solve the mystery of our heartbroken grandmother. At the very beginning of the game, after we save Tetra for the first time and leave Outset Island, the people of the island gather up on the beach to bid us farewell. They all stand here and wave us goodbye. But one person is very suspiciously missing. Link's grandmother. She's standing alone in front of her hut, looking at the ship leaving. In isolation. Link notices his grandmother standing there, and he waves at her. But, and that is really interesting, she never waves back to us. Tetra then speaks with us and we likely forget our grandmother immediately, but she never waves us goodbye. The game makes it very clear that our grandmother does not want us to leave her. She doesn't wave towards us when we leave. She doesn't say goodbye when we obtain the shield from her, but instead she just weeps alone. She's heartbroken when the game forces us to return to her. Again, this here is her freaking dialogue. Don't go, don't leave your poor old grandmother. Simply reading this makes me sad. A game as cute on the surface as Wind Waker over and over communicates to us that we broke the heart of our poor grandmother. And the reason it does this is because Wind Waker is as much a story of our grandmother as it is the story of Link. There are two central themes the game deals with that are interwoven, inseparable. The one centered on the characters of Link and Zelda is growing up and setting out into the world alone. The other theme, centered on the story of Ganon, King Daphne, and our grandmother, is letting your own child go and allowing them to set out into the world, leaving you alone behind. The game is about the fear of a parent losing or estranging from a child when it grows up. And it makes a lot of sense that this was on Aonuma's mind when he created Wind Waker, because Eiji Aonuma, the director of the game, became a father while Wind Waker was in development. It was his first game he created as a father. The game is about his fear of one day having to give up the control over his son's life so that his child can go out into the world and define his life for himself, leaving Aonuma behind in the process, which brings us back to our delayed gratification sticker. The reason the game takes place on Link's birthday is because of the game's themes. The game takes place the very day Link reaches adulthood. Metaphorically, the game begins on the first day Link is old enough to live his own life. And while Link is really excited to literally set sail and to explore the vast world ahead of him, he also leaves his mother figure behind by doing so. The game wants to convey to us that setting out into the world is not only exciting for us, but also causes pain to the parents we leave behind. It's why the central conflict of the game revolves around a bird stealing children from their parents. The bird symbolizes once again the children growing up. It's like the children grew wings and flew away, once again leaving their parents devastated and alone. The old man that assaults us against our will on Windfall Island. The father that is so heartbroken that his child is gone that he publicly screams for help at the center of town. He's once again here to remind us of the pain of a parent whose child is no longer entirely under his influence. Then there's the King of Red Lions. We literally sail through the entire game on the back of a father figure that is guiding us slightly. The sages are young children that take up the role of one of their ancestors, and so on. The idea is just all over the game, which brings us back to the fight against Puppet Ganon. See, Zelda desires the ocean. The ocean symbolizes the modern world and her own future. Ganondorf, however, desires Hyrule as it was before the flood. He desires the past. He's standing at the side of Zelda's bed in an image that reminds us of a father, and then he literally transforms into a gigantic shadow that is cast over the sleeping child, and then the child and this shadow that the father casts over it transform into a puppet that is controlled by strings. Ganon transforms Zelda into a puppet he controls here. He casts a shadow over the child and wants to control it like a puppet. The entire game up to this point we are permanently confronted with the grief of parents that allow their children to set out into the world but stay behind. This boss fight here symbolizes the antithesis to this. This boss fight here is the alternative to letting your child go into the world. The alternative is to cast a shadow over the lives and dreams of your kid and to control it like a lifeless puppet operated by strings. Metaphorically, we defeat this very idea here, in a room whose very floor reflects our mirror image back at ourselves. And I cannot tell you how much I love this, to be completely honest with you. I think the boss fight is a complete train wreck from a mechanical point of view. It's just so awkward to hit this boss. In his third phase, he just randomly flails around, it is confusing just to understand what we're supposed to do, and so on. But I wouldn't trade this boss in for anything, just because I love it so much from a thematic point of view. And that's just the beginning of the ending sequence, because once we defeat the puppet, we can finally climb onto the top of the tower and begin the ending of the game. And what an ending it is. We find Ganon atop the tower. He stares over the flooded land and tells us a story. His land once lay in a vast desert, burningly hot during the day, freezingly cold during the night. He desired the land of Hyrule, from which a fresh wind blew into the desert. The wind here symbolizes hope, something that pops up a couple of times in the game. The wind from Hyrule basically made Ganon hopeful that he could have a better life there, and thus he gathered the three pieces of the Triforce in Hyrule: wisdom, power and courage. courage. When wisdom, power and courage come together, the gods have no other choice than to grant whoever touches it whatever they desire. There's a bit of a message hidden here as well, by the way. It's really interesting that Aonuma chose wisdom, power and courage as the three things that have to be united to grant the holder every wish. You know, on a meta level, Aonuma is saying that if we manage to find wisdom, power and courage within ourselves, we can achieve everything we desire. But again, it's just a side note. Ganon disarms us and summons the Triforce by combining Link's, Zelda's and his own part. And at this point, it looks as if we have lost. Ganon is approaching the Triforce. He's about to get his wish granted. He wishes to restore the land of Hyrule to how it was before the flood and to gain control over it. And this is really interesting. Ganon is framed as a negative father figure. We learned that Zelda dreams of oceans in the sequence before. But this father figure of Zelda wishes that the land returns to the past. He wishes that the land is as he desires it and not in the state that Zelda dreams of. And in this very moment, when all hope seems lost, something amazing happens. King Daphnes appears out of nowhere. He touches the Triforce before Ganon, and King Daphnes, the character that is framed as a positive father figure, gets to make another wish. A wish very different to Ganon's. Here is what he has to say. Hope. I desire hope for these children. Give them a future. Wash away this ancient land of Hyrule. Let a ray of hope shine onto the future of the world. And the gods hear his wish. The Triforce begins to pulse and a bright light appears. The gods are listening. And then the king speaks the final words of his wish. Let our destinies finally be fulfilled. Ganondorf, may you drown with Hyrule. And then the Triforce floats into the air. And all hell breaks loose. The protective barrier that has shielded Hyrule Castle from the water masses suddenly breaks. Tons of water begins to flow into the land at once, flooding the last bits of Hyrule that haven't been destroyed so far. King Daphnes, the king of Hyrule, wished for the destruction of his own land, so that we, the children, can have a future of our own. It's so epic. Zelda hands Link the Master Sword and tells him that it is time for them to say goodbye to this place and to return to their ocean. But first, they have to defeat Ganon in one of the most epic final boss battles in gaming history, at least in my opinion. The whole thing is just so incredibly grandiose, where atop this tower, the water masses are crashing down left and right. The music is incredible. We just witnessed our mentor figure sacrifice all his dreams for our future. There is loud thunder cracking in the background, you know? It's as epic as climaxes get. Mechanically, the fight is fine as well. The way we defeat Ganondorf is by tricking him. Zelda shoots a light arrow directly onto our mirror shield and we reflect it back straight into Ganondorf's face. And then we finish the job. In one of the most brutal scenes in the entirety of Zelda, we hammer the Master Sword directly into Ganon's forehead. Ganondorf is defeated, but Hyrule is now forever lost to the water. We get to exchange a couple of last words with the King of Hyrule. He pretty much tells us the message of the game straight to our face and without much abstraction here. He says, "My children, listen to me. I have lived regretting the past and I have faced those regrets. If only I could do things again. Not a day of my life has gone by without my thoughts turning to my kingdom of old. I have lived my life bound to Hyrule." Hyrule obviously meaning the past here. In that sense, I was the same as Ganondorf. But you? I want you to live for the future. There may be nothing left for you, but despite that, you must walk a path of hope, trusting that it will sustain you when the darkness comes. And that is pretty much what Wind Waker is trying to say, below its cartoonish aesthetics. Wind Waker is saying to trust in life and to be hopeful. It says to trust your children when they grow up and to be hopeful for them, even if we are no longer in control over their lives. And it says to trust life and be hopeful when you're growing into an adult, leaving childhood behind and are confronted with the problems of the world. And then the king says his farewell. This is the only world that your ancestors were able to leave you. Please forgive us. Zelda tells him to wait. He could come with them after all. The kids have a ship. They can find it. They will find it. The land that will be the next Hyrule. Which makes the king smile and speak his final words. But child, that land will not be Hyrule. That land will be your land. And then the water masses come pouring down on them. Link and Zelda are magically protected by a bubble and float back onto the surface. But King Daphnes is not. He drowns underwater, together with the remains of Ganon and the land of Hyrule. We get to read his last thoughts. I've scattered the seeds of the future. And then the screen fades to black. The pirates find Link and Zelda swimming in the ocean. But Zelda doesn't look like the royal descendant of the family of Hyrule anymore. She once again looks like Tetra. Zelda now no longer looks like her metaphorical father saw her, but once again as she herself sees her. Everyone is on the pirate ship and happy, and with this the credits start to roll. Wind Waker is a game with very kid-friendly aesthetics, but below those kid-friendly aesthetics, it deals with very mature themes. It asks the question how to find orientation in a complicated world as a young adult. It asks the question how to deal with the pain of a parent who gives up the control over their children's life, and the answer it gives is by being hopeful. When the water masses pour down and we get swept away, we shall trust that we planted the seed to guide our children into their own future, and that we shall not try to cling on to the past. And I personally think the game tells these messages in an extraordinarily beautiful way. The game has a message for children that are about to grow up. The game has a message for adults letting go of their children. The game, however, doesn't really have a message for anyone in between. The game's themes cater to children and adults alike, but it doesn't have much to say to adolescents. And this is the third and final tragedy of Wind Waker. It was released into a gaming environment that just existed of a demographic not yet quite old enough to understand the game's message. So, this video wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about the big irony present. You see, the past that we let go of at the end of Wind Waker is the Hyrule of Ocarina of Time. There are even pictures of the different sages of Ocarina of Time drawn onto the windows behind the Master Sword. So the past that the king has to let go, the past that Ganon is clinging onto so desperately, is the Hyrule of Ocarina of Time. In the subtext, we also flood the past of the Zelda series here and get ready for something new. But famously, this did not happen. The next game, Twilight Princess, and the next Zelda game that we will discuss in this series did not enter new territory, but returned to the roots of the series. Wind Waker was decades ahead of its time. It was truly ridiculously ahead. If the game were to be released today, it would still feel fresh and new. That's how much ahead of its time Wind Waker was. Not even its graphics have aged today. It was actually so ahead of its time that its own time didn't really know what to do with it. After Wind Waker, Nintendo returned to the very Hyrule they just flooded. There is a certain irony to the fact that King Duthnas says the next land won't be called Hyrule, only for them to call the next land Hyrule once again. The times weren't ready to let go of the Zelda of the past quite yet. After the credits, there is one final scene. We are on the shore of Outset Island once again. And once again, we're about to set out. We're about to sail into the vast ocean. Metaphorically, we're about to set out to live our own lives. The King of Red Lines, however, isn't guiding us anymore. Now it is just a wooden boat. We are about to sail into life on a boat that is our literal father figure, and everyone is here to wish us luck. Everyone. This time, our grandmother is here saying goodbye to us as well. She finally came to terms with us setting out into the world alone, leaving her behind in the process. A strong wind breeze is blowing into the direction of the unknown, blowing wind into our sail. Tetra says that we do not have a destination, but that the wind will guide us. The wind is here, once again, a metaphor for hope. Even the title of the game can be read like this. If wind is a stand-in for hope in Wind Waker, then the name of the game can be read as Hope Waker, in the sense that the game wants to awaken hope in us. It's a play on the game's message. Everyone on the island waves us goodbye. The camera zooms into the sky and then it says the end, yet it means a beginning. And with this, Wind Waker comes to an end. When Wind Waker released, I was a young teenager. I was honestly as bewildered by the art direction Nintendo chose for the game as the other kids on the IGN message board were. Honestly, I could have been one of them if I had internet access in 2001 and spoke a single word of English. But while I did not connect with Wind Waker, when it released, I grew to love it years later. And I always returned to Wind Waker. And with each year that I grow older and with each playthrough that I do, I somehow love the game even more. No other game is like this for me. Wind Waker feels like a game that I had to grow into to understand. And the more I grow, the more I love the game. Even though Wind Waker released into an extremely difficult environment that forced them to scrap tons of ideas and content. Even though Wind Waker released at the worst possible time in the early history of gaming, probably even damaging Nintendo's entire reputation within a key demographic at a critical point of time. And even though Wind Waker wants to say goodbye to the past of the Zelda franchise and carve out a path for something new, which ultimately did not happen. Even though all of this happened, I cannot think about Wind Waker as anything other than an absolute success on almost any level. And as tragic as the circumstances may have been, Wind Waker itself is, at least in my opinion, a monumental masterpiece. And in the end, that is the only thing that matters. Hooray! Here we have it, Wind Waker in a nutshell, the size of a boat. Before we wrap this up, just a couple more things. So first, a gigantic ocean-spanning thank you to all my incredible Patreons whose names are currently scrolling by. Videos like this one are incredibly risky on YouTube, simply because they take so much time and work to produce, and if the algorithm rejects them, which you know, just happens, then it means that all this work basically goes to waste. The gentle ladies, gentlemen, and gentle people in general whose names are currently scrolling by are making sure that these videos can survive on the platform, even if YouTube rejects them. A huge thank you to them for that, as well as for being awesome in general. Second, a shout out to Reddit user Veridiculity. They did a really smart write-up on Reddit about how Wind Waker is inspired by the struggle of a parent letting go of its child, and this post is what sent me into the right direction for this video. Third, two small things that I wanted to waffle about in the video, but that didn't fit into the script. So first, I love Wind Waker's combat feedback. The combat is incredibly simple, but bashing the enemies in the game is incredibly fun nonetheless. One cool trick that they use, and that I seldomly see games use to enhance the impact of attacks, is this one. Did you notice it? They play a dramatic string sound effect over each attack, and if we manage to land several hits in a row, it almost sounds as if we were playing a small song. That's a really cool trick that makes combat feel this tiny bit more satisfying. I generally enjoy it if games get a bit creative with their sound design and think a bit outside of the box. Second, I absolutely love how sad and miserable the fairies look when we capture them in a bottle. It's just such a fun moment to go from excitement because we managed to capture a fairy to an immediate hit of guilt because we actually really captured a fairy. It's a great touch. And with this, we've reached the end of this little video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leaving a thumbs up would be what King Daphne Snohansen would do. If you really enjoyed it and are interested in more videos discussing games in depth, subscribing might be a good idea. The next video will be an indie game, and then we'll continue with the Zelda series by taking a look at Twilight Princess. Finally, if you truly loved the video and want to ensure that content like this can survive on YouTube, then there's also the option to support the channel via Patreon. Alright, thanks for watching, until next time. Lots of hugs.